You mentioned some of the people you've had on the podcast, obviously Cameron Haynes, Tim Kennedy, Terry Crews. Is there a common unspoken thread that is interwoven between these types of men?
Yeah, they all have a chip on their shoulder. I didn't expect that. I really didn't. I thought that these guys were going to be like so mentally healthy that nothing could get to them. And what I realized is no, they're actually not mentally healthy.
Wow. Hello and welcome to the Vinny Brusco Show podcast, episode number 458. This week's episode, I'm joined by Ryan Michler. Ryan is an entrepreneur, an author, a podcaster, and the creator of the Order of Man movement, which is both a podcast and a movement in which where it helps men protect, provide, and preside. Ryan and I got into a heap of conversation, including his journey to the Order of Man and creating it, the difference between responding and reacting, what it means to be a man, and much, much more. It was a pleasure speaking to Ryan. I highly recommend you checking out his book, The Masculine Manifesto, and checking out his podcast, The Order of Man. So I hope you enjoy episode number 458 with Ryan Michler.
And here we go.
It's unfortunate that so many of us underestimate the power of our intuition and the power of this sense or this feeling or divine intervention that can't quite be quantified. And because it can't quite be quantified, we often don't listen to it. But I think if we did, we'd find ourselves in a completely different situation than we might currently find ourselves in.
How can someone how have you fine-tuned that intuition?
Well, you have to act on it. That's it. Like it's interesting. It's an interesting question. It would be like asking me, how do you get better at baseball? You play baseball.
Well, is there a pathway to that? Yes, acting on it, but is there a way? Like for me, it's either sensory deprivation or meditation and these other forms of stillness, where I'm able to hone in on that voice inside of me and recognize that I am not my thoughts, but I am the observer of those thoughts. And then I'm able to act on thoughts or not act on thoughts.
Look, I know a lot of people talk about meditation and they talk about being still and present and all this kind of stuff. Like I call it new age, but it's really not new age. It's as old as man himself.
Right.
But like people constantly think to themselves, well, what if I sit here and pontificate on all this stuff? Or what if you just listened to it for a second and decided to follow it? It's not hard. It really, we all recognize it.
Right.
Hey, I'm feeling this way. I don't know why. I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. And then we like go off into some sort of, 40-day retreat like Jesus did. It's like, well, what if you just acted on it?
Yeah, there's that great book, Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, that talks about kind of leaning into that instinctual gut feeling. And there's the Eastern thoughts of like the gut being like the first mind, really, and the first heart, really. And leaning into that more so than the actual, because you'll talk yourself out of it and you'll go on that retreat and go, all right, well, that was just kind of this feeling I was feeling. It's gone now. It's kind of fizzled out. So I'm not going to make that move.
I don't know about all that. Maybe I'm not smart enough to understand that, or maybe I'm not in tune enough to understand that. All I know is that there's something that's speaking to me. I don't quite understand what it is. I don't quite understand why I should listen, but all I know is that every time I do, things work out pretty well. And so that's enough for me. And that might be a personality thing.
Sure.
That might be a learned thing, nature versus nurture. I really don't know what it is, but if you're thinking to yourself, well, how can I do this? I'm just speaking from my own perspective.
Sure.
And I don't think you need to meditate. I don't think you need to spend, hours upon hours alone in silence and sensory deprivation tanks and caves. Like, I just think you need to just shut the hell up for a second. And then whatever thought comes to you, like, you're not performing brain surgery. If something, whatever it is saying, hey, you should try this, is somebody going to die because you do that? Are you going to catastrophically ruin your life because there was some sort of premonition or dream or revelation. Again, I don't care what you call it, but I just don't think that it's the end of the world if you decide to pursue something based on a hunch.
Listen, that works too, right? That it's again, it's a personality thing. It's what lends itself to the best results for you personally. And if you have the experience where taking that step instinctually works for you, then that works as well. That is your expression of that. For others, it's sitting in that or going into darkness or sensory deprivation or retreats. And that might work, and pontificating or doing ayahuasca or whatever it is. And to your earlier point, it's something that is as old as man, right? As long as we can think about it, but so is our instincts, right? There's something about having that instant feeling of, again, nature versus nurture, whatever it is, there's something to that as well. So whatever breeds the result that allows you to be happy, I think is the best formula to get to that end result.
I agree. The only exception I would take to that is I want to get to it as quickly as possible. Like I don't disagree with anything you just shared. If something speaks to you or a certain experience like ayahuasca, for example, that's something I've never done. I don't feel the desire or need to do that. But if people do, then by all means. But my goal is to get to it as quickly as possible. Why would I want to wait months or years to try to go through this certain experience in order to create the life that I want? I can have a premonition today, immediately, and then I can act on it to some degree, and I can find out. I actually want to know. If I have this thought or this dream or this idea or this vision or whatever it might, however it might manifest itself to you, then I want to know immediately, today, as in right now. And I'm not going to wait for the next ayahuasca trip to South America or wherever it is people do ayahuasca things. I'm going to do it now. Okay. I'm going to figure it out now. I'm not beating up on any other experience. I'm just saying from my perspective, I want to know today, and I don't have months to figure it out. I've got like the next hour to figure it out.
Yeah. And that's a very tactile, tangible approach to breeding a result that you want in an instant. Have you always kind of been this way, or what was your journey to this version of you?
Yeah, I've always been pretty intuitive. I grew up fairly spiritual and religious. I didn't really have a religious home, I would say. I've always been Christian. When my mother was raising me and my sister primarily on her own, we always went to church. I don't remember very many Sundays where we didn't go to church. And it was usually bouncing around between different Christian denominations. And so a lot of my background comes from the perspective of Christianity. And it's always been enough for me. I actually am very empathetic to people who struggle with their faith, whether it's Christianity or faith in the earth or Mother Earth or like whatever you want to call it. I've always been empathetic because that isn't something I've had to deal with. I've always been very intuitive. I've always felt some sort of a spirit. I've always been pretty in tune with that, and it's just enough for me. Maybe that's a personality thing, like I was saying earlier, or maybe it was because of my upbringing. It was never forced upon me. I don't feel like it was ever pushed down my throat. Whenever I went to church, I always felt good. That's enough, because that's my testimony. I feel good when I go to church. And I feel good when I'm connected to God. And so I'm going to listen. And quite honestly, I feel like, who am I to listen to this intuition, to listen to or feel or experience this premonition, and then give that premonition the middle finger? Like, who am I to do that?
Do you lean into your specific faith now, or is it just become more of a general faith in, if you, again, God or universe or source, whatever you want to call it? Do you lean into that more so now in a specific denomination, or do you kind of lean into it as the overall arc of all religions?
I don't know. I don't know, man. Like I also don't need to know. It's just not a thing that matters to me. Not to say faith doesn't matter to me, but I don't care if you're a Baptist or a Mormon or a Lutheran or a Catholic or whatever. Now, I believe in God. I believe in Jesus Christ, and I think that is the path. So the denominations I'm talking about are Christian denominations, Christ-centered denominations, and I think that is the path forward. I just can't imagine a God that says, well, you got 90% right, but you missed the 10, so you're doomed to hell.
Right. So you're talking about how religion wasn't forced upon you, but kind of became a huge part of your life and part of, your mindset and just your approach to things.
Yeah, that's accurate. Yep.
I think the non-forced part is kind of the key part there, because, I grew up Catholic, went to Catholic school, and we used to have the permission slip signed after church by the priest to prove we went to church. So then it becomes like this thing where it becomes a chore, and it's not by choice that you're going to do these things or experience these things, but you're forced to do them. And then it becomes homework like anything else when you're young.
Well, that defeats the purpose of being close to God.
I couldn't agree with you more.
The purpose of God, being close to God, isn't to fill out a slip. I mean, one of the things that I experience in our organization at times, and is this idea of fellowship, or home teaching, the certain families that are assigned to you in the neighborhood. And while I certainly understand the importance of it and the spirit of the message, when you reach out to me and you're like, hey, did you talk to this family? Did you talk to this family? And then they just check it off a box. I can't help but think you cared less about the families that I'm supposed to be reaching out to, and more about making sure you hit your quota. Accountability is important. I'm not saying it isn't. Like, we should have some level of accountability, but let's make sure we keep it in the frame or the reference of the spirit of what we're trying to do, which is, in this case, in the context of what we're talking about, is to serve other people, not just to make them feel like we paid our obligatory visit with you, and that's all I really care about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it definitely becomes more of, it becomes something that you don't look forward to. It becomes something that's a chore. It becomes something you're like, well, I don't even want to be a part of this. You do obviously a lot of work with men in the Iron Council, and then obviously your podcast, Order of Man. I also facilitate a men's group called the Council of Dudes. How did you get into working with men specifically? What was that journey like?
I mean, really, about 7 years ago, I decided that, I had a podcast before the Order of Man podcast, and it was called Wealth Anatomy. And I was very focused on serving medical professionals with their financial services needs. So insurance, investments, retirement planning, that sort of thing. And I started a podcast because I thought it would be a great way to reach these medical professionals in a new way. I got really tired of seeing all these old, out of shape, overweight, partially balding, which, I'm kind of hitting that metric now, as I see a little thinning of the hair and a little gray in my beard.
It's distinguished.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a good way to say it. I'm going to start using that.
Excellent.
But I saw these guys, and they'd sit on their leather chairs, and they'd be higher than their clients. They'd talk down to their clients, and they'd talk down to me as a new advisor. And I just got really jaded with the entire process of trying to help people with their investment stuff. But I realized, maybe there's a way to connect with these people, because I did truly care about these individuals in a new medium. And that was digital marketing and podcasting at the time. This was roughly 8 years ago. And I realized very quickly that I love the medium of podcasting, but I didn't want to continue to have the same conversations about money. And I had gone through a separation with my wife. I had struggled as a father. I had struggled in the business. And the more that I talked about these things, the more I realized that the men I was around were struggling with the very same things, but none of us are willing to talk about it. Like, no guys are talking about it. You talk about, what did you call it? The Council of Dudes is the name of your program?
Yeah.
Nobody's talking about it. We're all dealing with the same shit. We all got the same baggage. We're struggling in our marriage. We're wondering about how to get into shape. We're trying to build businesses or pay debt off. Like, we're all dealing with the same. I don't know how to handle my kids. I'm a stepfather and I don't know how to do that. And I'm an alcoholic. Like, we're all dealing with the same stuff, and yet no man is willing to talk about it. And the more that I started talking about it, the more that I saw men come out of the woodworks were like, bro, I'm so glad you said that. I'm dealing with a struggling marriage. Man, I'm really glad you said that. I've got this business and I don't know how to make it work. And I realized, oh shit, we're all dealing with this. We're all facing these issues. And so we better open our mouths and start talking about it. You know, one of the things I think unequivocally and almost objectively people would look at and consider manly behavior is courage. And yet these guys, including myself at the time, lacked the courage to open my freaking mouth and start sharing the issues that I was dealing with so that I could be, well, so that I could work through it myself, but also so that I could be a catalyst for helping other men deal with the baggage they were dealing with. And so we launched this thing in 2015 called Order of Man. And I started a podcast, and from day one, it blew up. It blew up. And it's been challenging at times to stay on top of everything that we've experienced and the growth that we've seen. But what an amazing opportunity. And to go back to our conversation earlier about our relationship with God or Mother Earth or whatever it is you call it, this has been put at my feet, and I feel like I have an obligation to pick it up and carry it as far as I absolutely can.
Do you ever fall into the mindset of comparison, feeling that it's not enough, that you're not doing enough in comparison to other people doing things on the platforms?
This is a catch-22. It's a lot of the times we hear from these pop culture type references that comparison is the thief of all joy and you shouldn't compare yourself to others. It's true. It's not wrong. When you start comparing yourself to other people, it does rob you from joy. But, you know, frankly, Vinny, I'm not after joy in my life. It's not really a metric of success in my life.
What are you after?
Fulfillment is different. To me, I hear happiness, joy, and I feel like it's a bit of bliss. I feel like it's free from adversity or challenge, and that really isn't something that I'm after in my life. Now we can work through the semantics. Maybe you disagree, maybe you think that definition is off. We can work through that, but I'm just telling you what I believe those definitions to be, and maybe we're very much aligned, or maybe we aren't. Who knows? I want fulfillment. And fulfillment to me isn't the absence of pain and suffering and hardship and challenge, but the ability to overcome those things. So I don't want a blissful life. I don't want a joyful life. I don't actually really want to be happy. I want to be fulfilled. And so when I look at you or I look at other people and I'm like, man, Vinny's doing this and Joe's doing this and John's doing this, and I compare myself to those individuals, I have to remember that it's that desire to compare, or at least to see what's possible, and then also maybe even create some level of healthy competition that is not mutually exclusive from my desire to succeed and win. And I cannot separate the two. Like, I can't say that I want to be the best that I can possibly be and then simultaneously not compare myself to other people and what is possible. It's not a reality. If I want to be the absolute best, then I need to look at the best and say, well, that guy's doing this and it's more than I'm doing. So what is possible? There's dangerous ways to do that, and I've fallen into those traps, and there's very healthy and positive ways to do that. And I feel like I try to move towards those things more often.
Yeah, the happiness and the bliss and harmony, definitely by definition, or at least the sound of the word, is removed from perseverance and struggle and hardship. but those are definitely byproducts of fulfillment, and they're momentary, right? Like they're blips on the radar of, it may just be as simple as someone reaching out to you with a message or a text or a DM saying, hey man, you said this and it impacted me this way, or a moment with your wife or with your kids. But those are fleeting, right? And if you rest your laurels on the fact that you want to be happy, then you're going to set yourself up for disappointment.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. I'm trying not to be ungrateful of the people who reach out to me and say they're served by what we're doing. But I want to be really frank with you. When individuals reach out and they're like, hey, your podcast or your mission or your message or whatever it is that you're doing has served me in this way, I feel good about that. Absolutely. You're right. It's fleeting, but I do feel good about that. But also, I don't need that, because that is my desire to serve individuals, but it really isn't my fuel. It isn't something I need to have your validation in order to proceed with this thing. So I'm trying not to look a gift horse in the mouth, if
Sure.
you will. Like when people reach out and they're like, hey man, like you did this podcast and it was amazing, man. I'm so honored and grateful to know that we're doing something that's serving you. And that's good. That's awesome. That's exactly what we want. But at the same time, I will do it whether or not I get those messages or not. It just doesn't matter to me. That's
a great metric. And I had that conversation myself actually in the shower one time. I'm getting my master's in mental health counseling and the podcast and the men's group, and I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu as well. And I said to myself, if the future version of you comes down and says, hey man, your podcast is never going to be Joe Rogan, right? That's the barometer. That's the bar set. You're never going to become a black belt. And your therapy practice is going to be minimal. Would you still do these things? And the answer unequivocally was, yeah, of course. So I was like, all right, then it doesn't matter what the actual end result is. You're doing it for the sake of doing it. And it's altruistic in that sense. So to your point, the validation or the paycheck or the downloads or the black belt are just byproducts of showing up and doing the work. And wherever it lands and ends, so be it.
How long have you been training jiu-jitsu, Vinny?
4 years.
Are you a blue belt, purple belt?
Blue belt.
Blue belt. So I've been training for about 3 years. I'm a blue belt as well. And when I got my blue belt, this was about a year and a half ago or so, year and a half ago or so. I posted something because I was proud of it, right? Like I made a post. I was proud of it. I was excited about it. And, everybody was like, oh, that's awesome. It's incredible. Oh, amazing. You got your, and I appreciate the accolades. It makes me feel good. It certainly strokes the ego. But it's not a surprise.
Right.
It's not something that wasn't going to happen. Like it's going to happen because I show up every day. I put in the work. I'm actually sidelined from jiu-jitsu for the next 2 or 3 months due to an injury. But I go to every single training, and I don't train jiu-jitsu. I lift weights and do some body weight movements and some flow stuff because that's the capacity I have physically right now. It's not a surprise to me when I got my blue belt. I'm going to be excited about it, but it's not going to be surprised to me when I get my purple belt. It's not going to be a surprise to me or something I didn't think I could achieve. It's just the natural and inevitable outcome of the effort that I've been putting in. When we achieve success in the podcast, it's not a surprise to me that we're one of the top ranked podcasts specifically for men. It's not a surprise to me when we have guys like Tim Tebow or Ben Shapiro or Terry Crews come on the podcast. It's just the inevitable result of the work that we're doing. That's it. And that's a beautiful place to be, because now I don't need to measure my performance on external circumstances. I get to measure them on internal circumstances, which is my ability to show up, my desire to do good, my preparation and dedication to the craft. And those are all things well within my control. And then I can just let the chips fall where they may, and they will come inevitably. I have no doubt. That's 100% faith. It's not even faith. Faith is believing in something that you cannot see or is not tangible. It's not even faith. I've seen enough people do it. It's like this. if I eat right and lift, am I going to lose weight and get stronger? Does a person need faith to believe in that? No, because enough other people have done it that it's proven at this point. Like, there's no faith required. You just need to have some fortitude to be able to see it through. And that's the stage I'm at in my life right now. It's an amazing thing.
And you could take that and extrapolate that and apply that same type of approach to marriage, to children, to work, to anything. If you put in the work and the effort, it's going to breed results, right? If you put in the time and carve out the time with your children or with your wife or at work, you be super present while you're working, the results are going to come.
They are. I mean, and I look, it's hard to add anything to that. That's it. Period. Right.
Period. Right. Yeah.
But here is one thing I would say is that in the moment, whether you're trying to work on your marriage or get in better shape or pay off debt or build a business or whatever your thing is at the moment, it's very difficult when you're faced with challenges and obstacles and roadblocks to your path to success. This is why it's so important to have the Council of Dudes. This is why it's so important, whether you're part of that organization or mine or none or whatever, to have people in your corner, and specifically credible, qualified people in your corner to say, Vinny, I know you're discouraged right now. I know you're starting this podcast. I know that you want to see it grow. I know that you're not experiencing the results and the growth that you'd like, but I promise you, keep doing what you're doing. Or maybe it's, hey, the reason you're not experiencing the growth is because you need to change these couple of things and make these minor adjustments and tweaks along the way, and then you'll be fine. But you need a guy, another man in your corner who's credible and who's qualified to be able to explain to you and keep you in the game. My kids and I and my wife really like to watch the show Alone. If you've seen it, the whole premise of the show is they put 8 or 10 people out into the wilderness, and the last person to stay wins. And these people will go 75, 80, 100 days at a time. How much longer would they last if they weren't alone and they were actually with one other qualified, incredible person? Double, triple, quadruple? Who knows? Maybe they could make a life, an entire life, 80 years. Because they're out there with somebody else. Guys, you have to have people in your corner when things go wrong, when things aren't working. Sometimes I get locked into my own head and I don't have any outlet. I've thought about, I watch my wife. She's a homemaker and she's an incredible woman and she loves food preservation. And so right now she's in growing and harvesting season. So she's harvesting peas and tomatoes and carrots and green beans. And then what she loves to do with it is she loves to can those things. And so she's got this steamer, and it's probably 18 inches tall and it's probably 18 inches wide. And it's this big pot essentially. And she puts it on the stove and she puts all of her cans in there that she's preserved green beans and carrots and whatnot in these things. And it has this little valve on the top of it. And so she'll turn the stove up and it's got this little valve right here. And that valve is when the pressure gets too much, that valve opens up and releases some of the steam. And that steam is hot. Like if you just swipe your hand through it, you can feel it. It's hot, right? But it has that on there because if it didn't have that pressure valve, that release valve, it would literally turn into a bomb. It would blow up the kitchen. It's to release steam. And this is the same concept with us as men. We go at it alone. We work hard. We're like, man, I pride myself on kicking ass and doing everything I need to do. And we have no outlet. We have no vent. And so we turn into ticking time bombs. Instead, you got to have a vent. Maybe that's jujitsu. Maybe that's working out. But also, it's talking with other men. This is something we don't do. We believed, I don't know when this happened, but maybe it came with movies where we started watching, when I was a kid, I looked at the Marlboro Man. I'm like, that guy's a badass. Yeah. And then I got a little older and I'm like, James Bond and Jason Bourne. I'm like, these are the guys. And what do all of them have in common? They're loners. They're losers. Jason Bourne is a loser. James Bond is a loser. Now he gets chicks, but he's broken. He's a broken individual. What we need to do is we need to find other people in our corner that we can be around, that we can talk with, that we can communicate with, that we can push against mentally, verbally, physically. That's what's going to make us better. And that's what we as men are conditioned to do throughout all of time in history. And yet we don't do it in modern times.
You mentioned some of the people you've had on the podcast, obviously Cameron Haynes, Tim Kennedy, Terry Crews. Is there a common unspoken thread that is interwoven between these types of men?
Yeah, they all have a chip on their shoulder. I didn't expect that. I really didn't. I thought that these guys were going to be like so mentally healthy that nothing could get to them. And what I realized is, no, they're actually not mentally healthy.
Wow.
They've actually gone through some horrific and challenging and difficult and destructive times. And yet they've learned to take that and harness it in a way that makes them forces to be reckoned with. I mean, you look at somebody like Tim Kennedy, that guy has seen some shit.
Yeah.
And there's some demons inside of that man. And yet he takes those demons and that shit and that anger, even that propensity for violence, and he harnesses it for his life's mission, which is to protect and preserve human life. That's what he told me. You take a guy like David Goggins. Are you telling me, can you actually watch David Goggins and tell me that guy isn't mad about something?
Yeah.
He's upset about something. And
he definitely
believes he is. And yet he's harnessed it for productive outcomes to serve literally millions of people.
Is that sustainable?
It is, if that's all you do. And I think that's some of these guys' demise. They're very one-dimensional. So I love David Goggins for who he is, and the motivation and inspiration he provides to other people. But I don't think it's a sustainable thing if you're trying to be everything to everybody. But a lot of these very successful people that and this is a hard part, is that we as men tend to look at other individuals and think their level of success is to reach David Goggins status, or to run a marathon every day in the morning before you go to work like Cam Haynes, or to run an organization, an institution like Andy Frisella with First Form. I think, based on what I've observed, that it's sustainable if that's your singular pursuit. And by the way, it's not wrong, but It isn't my pursuit. It's not mine.
Yeah.
I want to grow this movement and organization, but I also want to be present for my family. I also want to be healthy with my relationship with God. And so that means at times I've had to throttle back the business because I'm a man. Like, I don't have enough time to do the business and the other things that are important to me.
Yeah. I call it the valid humanistic excuses, and you can overcome those, and you could strangle those, you could tackle those, but they're still valid. It's kind of hard to wake up and run a marathon every day when you have work and you work till whatever time. And like, if you take this, they're vacuums, right? And they show us the human potential, to your point, if you lean in full tilt into this mindset, this approach. But for the common folk, and we'll call them common folk, that may not be sustainable. So it does become a point of comparison as a thief of joy. Because if you look at a Cam Haynes or David Goggins, you might look at yourself and go, well, I'm a failure because I can't run a marathon every day before I go to my 9-to-5 job like Cameron Haynes.
Yeah. Excuse me. Well, I like what you said about their ability to do those things and focus on those things, and also that we can be inspired by them. Because if you look at somebody like Cam Haynes, I love Cam for who he is. I love how he shows up. I love that he influences people, and he's been a friend over the past 4, 5, 6 years now. I'm not interested in running a marathon every morning. But if Cam can get up 2 or 3 hours before work, you bet your ass I can get up 30 minutes before work and have a healthy breakfast or do a workout, right? Mm-hmm. So we need these obsessive individuals to show us what is possible. Now, we may not reach that level of obsession or achievement, but if it helps us move the Overton window to a healthy place, then I got to have a guy like in my life like Cam. I got to have a guy in my life like Andy Frisilla or Jocko Willink or Terry Crews or Tim Tebow or any number of these guys who I've had on. I have to have these individuals in my life because it's what moves my performance to the right side of the equation, even if just a bit.
Yeah. What is your definition of a man? And I know I'm sure that's a very loaded question, and I'm sure there's multiple answers for that. But do you have a definitive definition for what a man is? And was there a moment in your life that you said, "I've arrived and I'm a man"?
Well, it's not loaded, and it's not even something that has multiple definitions. There's really only one definition of what it means to be a man. And people will argue with me on this, and this is a hill I'm willing to die on. The definition of a man is somebody who's a protector, provider, and presider over himself, the people that he loves, and people who cannot do it for themselves. That's it. Like, there's no subjectivity to that. There's no debate about that. And people say, well, what makes you qualified to say that? Well, it's not me. It's thousands and thousands of years of human history and evolution. If you look at all of cultures throughout all of time and history, some never even introduced to each other, we all have, or they all have, striking similarities between the way in which they view manliness, and that is to protect people and be capable of doing so, providing the natural and raw resources that are needed to thrive, and leading other people well, people to places they could not have imagined going on their own. It's not subjective. It's absolutely objective. And it really isn't until the relative ease of modernity have we began to even call into question what it means to be a man. Well, Ryan, we don't need protectors. The world is safe. Well, that's easy for you to say until you're faced with a violent encounter. And if you had to choose between a woman or a man to protect you, who would you choose? You would choose the man, right? Of course, whether that was a good choice or not, based on our modern proficiencies. Right? When you want people to provide for you, you look to the man. When you want people to lead, you look to the man. Why? Because it's biologically hardwired into us. People say, well, manliness, that's a societal construct. No, it isn't. It's a biological construct, and I'll give you this. It's supported societally. Why? Because it works.
Right.
We are bigger, stronger, faster, more prone to take risk. We're dominant. We're aggressive. We're territorial. We're decisive. That's not to say that women can't be those things, but predominantly those characteristics are defined in men. And it isn't because mommy and daddy told us to do it. It's because you have testosterone and vasopressin and other hormones to greater degrees than women that are coursing through your veins and causing you to act the way that you act. When I see somebody who might pose a risk, what do? I puff up my chest. I get bigger. I put on a menacing face. It's not like somebody told me to do that. Like, I don't remember my dad or mom saying, hey, if you ever see somebody who's a threat, like, I want you to stick your shoulders up and puff your chest out and look at them really mean. No, like, that's hardwired into us. It's hardwired into you. Now, I'll say this. There's a lot of talk about toxic masculinity. Masculinity is not toxic. Masculinity is amoral. Masculinity is a set of characteristics and behaviors and virtues, maybe not even virtues. I'll just say characteristics and behaviors that are generally associated with men based on our biological makeup. So that's what I just said. Violence, aggression, strength, dominance, stoicism, a propensity to take more risks, than our female counterparts. Those are masculine behaviors. Well, how do I know this? I can look at my 6-year-old boy, and if he doesn't get what he wants, what did he do? He grabs you by the arm and he scratches or he bites you.
My 3-year-old does the same thing. Yeah.
Literally, like, I will bite you and I will submit you into giving me what I want. Girls don't do that.
Yeah, they certainly don't. No, they don't. My daughter's 7, my son's 3, and that is the exact dynamic that's going on in my household daily.
What do girls do, though? They put their doe eyes on. They talk in a sweet voice. They love up on you. They express empathy. They communicate. Like, these are all feminine characteristics. So we have masculinity, neither toxic nor virtuous. Some people like to say you have the opposite sides of the equation. Masculinity is toxic, and then you have the other camp, which is masculinity is virtuous. It's not actually either. It's amoral. What makes a man, to come back to your question, is the ability to harness your masculine characteristics, dominance, strength, aggression, violence, competitiveness, stoicism, into productive outcomes for yourself, the people you care about, and the people under your care. My boys, I have 3 boys. I have a daughter as well. I have 3 boys. They're not men. Nobody even expects them to be men. And yet they're still masculine. They're still violent. They're still strong. They're still aggressive. They exhibit all the masculine characteristics. They just don't quite know how to harness it yet. And therefore we don't call them men.
That's a great point. And both of those attributes, both male and female, are within us, right? We have the ability to be empathetic as men. We have the ability to
Yes.
Exude those female traits. And it's important that we do so. But at the same time, it's also, I think, even more important for us to live in that space of being a man. And I think you nailed it perfectly. And I think for me, a line of demarcation was when I had the ability to respond to life rather than react. When I realized that I am capable of controlling who and what I am in every moment. Now, that's not always perfect, but I do my best to kind of lean into that as much as possible. So when I was able to recognize that space, I was like, okay. And what do you want to say? I've arrived to manhood or whatever you want to say. It was a moment for me that stood out and said, okay, this is something I have power over. And now I'm able to take that and embody it and bring it into the world and show others how to do so, or at least be a potential guide in that sense for my children or from whoever.
Which means that you're being manly. So I wouldn't say that we arrive at this stage, because this was part of your question of being a man, but we certainly all exhibit times where we're acting manly or we're not. Can I swear on your show, Vinny? Is that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So my 6-year-old son, when he doesn't get his way, he's fucking pissed. And so what does he do? He bites, he scratches, he claws, he might even throw himself on the ground and throw a temper. He'll do whatever he needs to do to get his way. And there's times where I'm like, bro, I get it. I would be pissed as well. And there's times where I'm effing pissed to the point that he is. And yet I don't throw myself on the ground. Like, if I'm pissed at you, Vinny, we're talking and you say something that just makes me mad, and we're like, I'm not going to bite you.
Right.
You know, but I'd be like, bro, I'd be pissed.
Right.
And yet I handle it in a mature, responsible, manly way. And that's the difference. What you said, I really like what you said, react versus respond. I think that's a very, very big differentiating factor between being masculine, which is amoral, and acting manly, which is a response, not simply an emotional reaction to something.
I know we're coming up on time, so I want to respect that, of course. Is there any last notes or thoughts in regards to how people or how men can show up more for themselves or for their communities or for their families?
Yeah, I mean, let's riff on this response versus react framework that you just gave us a minute ago. Most of the time, we're so busy with life, whether it's our family, our children, our wives, our career pursuits, our bosses, our church obligations and callings. And we have so much going on in our life that we just don't free ourselves up enough to be able to be responsive. And so most of our lives, our waking hours are spent reacting to problems that we see. Oh, my wife's mad and she's mad at me because I came home late from work, and my kids are out of control because they had a bad day at school, or they didn't get enough sleep. And so now it manifests itself as just being loud and annoying and rambunctious, or my boss is an asshole because he's giving me this deadline and it's unreasonable and I can't hit that deadline. And so we're just putting out fires constantly. We're reacting. And that's why so many people look at a man, and when I use it in this term, I'm talking about an adult biological male. They look at a man and they're like, that guy is not somebody I would follow. Right. Because you're acting like a child. We need to shift ourselves from the reactionary to the responsive. And how do you do that? Well, to start, you got to wake up 15, 20, 30 minutes earlier. You have to. Because in that 30 minutes, that's going to give you time. I'm just going to grab something here. That's going to give you time to plan out your day. And all of a sudden now, because you spend 20 or 30 minutes in the morning planning out your day, now you have the opportunity to be a bit more responsive. I would also suggest that you take a look at your schedule, and instead of being from 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 11 to 12, and so on, that you give yourself a half an hour buffer between each of your meetings. Because what does that allow you to do? It allows you to defuse. So, Vinny, when we're done, I'll have a half an hour. Not in this context because we had some technological issues. That's okay. That's actually a really good point, because things come up, right? Like the internet doesn't always work out the way that it should. And so, okay, well, I got to have a buffer in there just in case.
Right.
And that buffer allows me to decompress, gives me a few minutes to decompress, think about how it went, talk with you, send you a message, say, hey, Vinny, thanks for having me on. That was enjoyable. Great conversation. And then it allows me to transition into my next meeting, which in this case is going to the lake and watching my daughter. She's very obsessed with having me come to the lake and watching her jump off the dock. Cool. That's what you need of me. I'm all about it. But that's responsive. That's not reactive, because I plan it into my day. She's been talking about it for a week. I said, hey, on Tuesday at 11, I'm going to wrap up with Vinny, and then I'm going to drive to the lake and I'm going to watch you. I can only be there for about a half an hour, but I'm going to watch you jump off the lake. That's responsive. So we need to create these margins in our lives in the beginning of our day, throughout our day, and then at the end of the day is give ourselves a half an hour at the end of our workday to decompress. So your workday should actually stop. If you're done at 5, it should actually stop at 4:30. Like, you don't do meetings till 5, you do meetings till 4:30, because that half an hour decompression time allows you to think about your thoughts, to write things down, to plan next day. And then you can go home and you're like, cool, I'm checked out. Like, I'm done, and I can be fully present with my family. So it should be an end of your work day and an end of your life day, which is if you go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, at 9:30, I'm done. We turn off the TV, we put the phones away. Kids are already in bed. They should be in bed long before 9:30. And then you go into your office. Hey, here's what I learned. Here's what I want to do tomorrow. Here's what I learned from today. And you decompress so that tomorrow you can come back and you can respond. And then you go to bed and you make love with your wife because you're fully present with her. And then you go to sleep and you start it all over again tomorrow.
That sounds perfect.
It does sound, it doesn't always work like that, bro. You know it as well as I, but that does sound perfect. That's a beautiful way to do the day.
That is, yeah, listen, absolutely. If you can get more of those types of days than not, then you're gonna feel better. You're gonna operate better. You're gonna move better. You're gonna want to show up more presently and more optimized. And it becomes this self-fulfilling machine. One thing feeds the other, right? The mind feeds the body feeds the soul. And it's to your earlier point. Listen, if you're trained jiu-jitsu, you don't want to eat like shit because you don't want to be on the mats and be gassed out, right? And then you want to have the clear head. So it all kind of feeds the next part, and then it becomes inertia and momentum, and you ride that for as long as you can, and there's going to be inevitable waves crashing, but you ride that wave for as long as you can, and try to get the most out of it.
Yes, sir. Couldn't have said it better myself.
I don't want to prevent you from seeing your daughter on the dock. Where can people connect with you? Where can people, obviously get the podcast? And
yeah, I mean, the best place, you're listening to a podcast right now. So we've got our own podcast, Order of Man. So connect with us there, or on our headquarters at orderofman.com. And then on social, if you want to follow us on social, it's all at Ryan Michler, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever. My last name is Michler, Ryan Michler.
Ryan, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you for showing up the way you do. And I appreciate your following you and all the work you're doing.
Appreciate it, brother. Look, man, I do a lot of podcasts. You're asking different questions, which is such a relief to me. I'm like, thank you. Thank you for asking me different questions, meaningful questions, thoughtful questions. You're great at this, brother. I'm excited to see what you do.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. We're going to roll in one day.
Awesome.